Very distressed to learn of the vote by the Forest Lake City Council to deny a psychiatric residential treatment facility for children and youth ages 7 to 17 who are mentally challenged. This funding was provided by the 2015 legislature, $6.6 million for 3 of these facilities. And unlike some past instances where there's strident opposition, this one had broad community support from everybody who testified. There were 3 different hearings of the council. And the last one, there were 17 who spoke in favor of it, including neighbors, and 1 person who spoke against it because it would, quote unquote, change the neighborhood. The mayor recruited and appointed a replacement city council person the week before, who was along with him, 2 of the 3 votes, 5-vote council to oppose this. And it's just despicable and disgraceful that they would deny this to replace a horse facility. So it's okay to place horses in this area, but not children that are in need of help. We have a crisis in Minnesota, I should say, we have a critical shortage of residential facilities and beds for youth and for adults suffering from mental illness. This is the best way to treat those that have various degrees of need who can't need more than outpatient care. It's just appalling that 3 people who are in positions of leadership for their city could just so heartlessly turn their backs on youth ages 7 to 17 who have need. A facility that was very well designed that would have provided 150 jobs. It's just shameful, just shameful. And I hope there's some way that the citizens of Forest Lake can make their voices heard and persuade at least one of those city council members to change their position and allow this project to move forward. I'd be glad to respond to questions on that or anything else.
Have you talked to the mayor or council members?
I have not, no.
Why not?
I haven't done it yet.
You fine with them?
I'll see. I wouldn't be able yet to have a civil conversation with them. They knew what they were doing. I mean, there was plenty of, there were 3 hearings. This is not like a surprise. This is not something that, went on lack discussion or anything else. So.
And none of your commissioners, anybody in your administration?
Commissioner Casilla has had a representative speaking in support of it.
Okay. But did not talk to them since the vote, or?
I don't know that anybody has.
Okay.
Is it your hope in bringing this up to raise awareness of what happened, or do you believe you can actually use the bully pulpit as a position to maybe affect some change and reverse this?
The news reports say it is a final decision, which is one of the reasons it doesn't seem fruitful to talk to people who already made their minds up and who can't even articulate a valid reason for their opposition. So whether, I don't know, according to Forest Lake city procedures, whether it's possible for one person to change their mind and reopen the vote. Only 3 people, so, or as the news report suggests, it's a final decision and they need to move to look elsewhere to try to make this project happen.
Can you talk more about the timber initiative and what, I think the release says there's timber shortage.
The shortage of available resource for the industry, for the loggers and the wood processing plants in Minnesota, which are vital to our economy, both the loggers and the processors. And I met with them along with Commissioner Landwehr about a month ago now, and they outlined their concerns and the problems they had with the DNR did a very thorough, careful analysis of the current conditions and determined that 1.2 million cords were feasible for sustainability of our forests long term, but for various reasons, the department was recommended only 927,000. And this was very distressing to and I had by executive order said that for this year it's 950,000, so that's effectively a reduction. So they are very distressed by that and talked about how this would jeopardize continuing operations for one or more of the facilities up there, which are huge employers and hugely important. So we're looking for ways to find more resource, and one is the private landowners, which have a considerable number of trees, especially aspen, which is the primary focus of the industry. And so we've come up with this way of incentivizing on a short-term basis private landowners to make their trees available for logging. So ran it by the industry. They are favorable, and by some of the key legislators, so hopefully it'll get support.
Governor, in regard to the proposal for the Rural Finance Authority funding increase, is it appropriate now to be thinking about the financial situation, the economic situation in Minnesota agriculture as a farm crisis akin to the 1980s? How would you compare this situation to that one? And what kind of response going forward do you think the state's going to have to make if this situation continues?
Well, it's the same systemic problem, which is low prices, below the cost of production. I compare it for what occurred 30 years ago. I can't say what the similarities and differences are. I remember back then the interest rates were extraordinarily high. I mean, came off of a late 70s where you had 20% interest rates. So that was really, and that's not the case here, but after some decent years, which actually was vital to pull Minnesota out of the Great Recession, those prices have plummeted, and now they're losing money on much of what they produce, which is unsustainable. So, unfortunately, the president's policies, as they are potentially very harmful to agriculture, with a trade war with both NAFTA with Canada and Mexico, who are our largest agricultural trading partners, as well as export sales to China and the like. So the situation is already very bad, and it threatens to get worse. So whatever we can do to provide financial support during this time and until prices hopefully rebound and they can make a fair profit in the marketplace is what we should be doing.
Governor, can I get you to comment on the funding that you're asking for the Suicide Prevention Hotline, and how critical is that, and what would this do?
Well, anything we can do to reach out to people or allow them to reach out to us at that crucial point where they're deciding whether to take their lives is something that we should be doing, and this is immediate access to somebody who's trained and can provide that kind of care. I remember when I was working for a social aid agency in Boston 40 years ago, you had a crisis intervention center, a telephone hotline, and people would call, and suicide was one of the problems that were presented, and I mean, literally, people with training can save lives and also buy some time for on-site assistance. So I think it's crucially important, and it saves lives in Minnesota. It's well worth the effort.
Have you talked to legislative leaders about this? I know you get together often.
We just turned this around. They were gone last week, so we'll do so certainly, and hopefully it'll have bipartisan support.
Have you begun having offline conversations with lawmakers about the tax conformity plan? And if not, can you assess your level of concern about getting a deal done within the final 6 weeks of this session?
I spoke with Senator Gazelka earlier this week. He called me. I'm having lunch with Representative Portman today. My staff has reached out to numerous legislators, including in terms of the tax bill, Commissioner Bowerly, although we don't have anything to talk about until we find out what they are proposing, which is why it's really important that they present publicly their tax bills, both in the House and the Senate, so we can compare them and get down to serious discussions.
Are you worried about just the lift being able to be accomplished as time erodes on this session?
Well, the sooner they put them out so they can, because these are complex issues with the federal tax bill, so the sooner they get them out so everybody can review and we can get the various expertise brought to bear on it would be important. I'm less concerned about, tax bills always end up in the last week of the session. What I'm really concerned about is what gets loaded onto the tax bill, what gets loaded onto the bonding bill, what gets loaded onto some of the supplemental appropriations bills that are really vitally important, and things that are unrelated, that are a controversial policy as a way of trying to force me to swallow things that I just don't agree with. And I sent a letter, as you know, to the leaders earlier this week saying that isn't going to work. I mean, if I have to veto bills that have a lot of good things in them because somebody's trying to force something down in my throat, it's just, I'm not going to agree. And if they do send it to me early enough in the session, with time remaining, they can have a chance to revise the bill, and we can come out with something we can all accept. And that's what should be done now, or starting now, rather than sending me bills that are loaded with things that they know I can't support, is for us to sit down and negotiate out our differences and see if we can find the areas that we agree upon. And then they can take the rest of it to the people of Minnesota next fall and see how people determine they want the state to be led for the following 2 or 4 years. And that's a responsible way to deal with it. There are very, very real differences that exist between the Republican majority and myself.
Have you told the leaders that in words similar to what you just did?
Well, I think my letter made that clear, but we'll have a leadership breakfast next Tuesday, and I'll certainly reinforce that point. But I've said that before in those breakfast meetings in the letter, and I'll continue to say it.
Governor, MNsure and Minute Services have been the focus of several hearings today or this week in the legislature. Yesterday, Republican senators were very upset by the fact that $1.3 million from a highway user account is being used for the call center. Commissioner Doman said that you had signed off on that decision. They want to try to block that money from being used to answer calls. Your thoughts on it?
They don't want us to answer the phones when Minnesotans are calling with problems. And it's already, the system's overloaded, and a lot of people getting busy signals and just giving up. I mean, it's almost, do they want to make the situation better, or do some of the legislators want to make it worse?
They say that money should be used for highway construction, not for answering phone calls.
Well, we have an overload. There should be enough money for both. They should have provided that 1.3 million, as I requested in the supplemental, at the beginning of January, so that we could respond and start to improve this situation. I think some of them want to just keep it as bad as possible for as long as possible. They had over 20 hearings. They get to pound the table and bash it around. And, they don't have a solution. We talk about private vendors. MNsure used a private vendor, Hewlett Packard, and spent over $15 million and many months before Hewlett Packard said, we can't do it. So Min stepped in to try to resurrect it. And, they don't have a solution, but they just like to grandize about the problem, grandstand about the problem. And as I say, not to provide money so we could gear up and answer the phones for people that have these problems. There's no logical explanation for it other than that they don't want us to be able to answer the phones.
What do you think of Representative Nash's bill that would require getting outside bids for IT projects? Your commissioner testified yesterday pretty adamantly against it. Would you veto it?
Well, we should have the flexibility, yes. I mean, they should stop trying to run the executive branch. I mean, the encroachment into the responsibilities of the executive branch have been creeping into Minnesota government for years before I arrived. And, it's very hard to get legislators to back off, but they don't understand the appropriate separation of powers. And it's not for them to run the executive branch operations. In this case, as I said, much of MNlars has been contracted out. They're private vendors beyond HP. They're private vendors for all different pieces of it. And that was the first route attempted. Same thing with MNsure. First route attempted was to have IBM take over the responsibility, and they screwed it up, and they still can't figure out how to fix the things that they screwed up. So it's not as though there's a silver lining out there with the private firms, which are reputable firms, but these are just extraordinarily complicated. MNlars, you're taking a system that's 30 years old. They can't even find anybody out in the industry to repair the problems. Nobody deals with those anymore. So they're taking a 30-year system and trying to transform it into a modern one. And obviously, it had failings. I've been asked what lesson I'm learned. Don't roll out a major statewide system entirely on day one. Do what the private sector has learned to do, which is try it out in one area geographically and in terms of population, learn from those mistakes, and then, and as the investigation showed in this case, there was not adequate pre-testing before, which should have been obvious to the professionals involved. But so that would be the number one lesson I'd learned, and it's not going to resolve the situation here. But there are steps that can be taken, and to think that the executive branch wants to mismanage things fits their ideology and fits their politics for this year, but it's not responsible governance.
And to be clear, would you veto that bill?
If it dictated procedures, yes.
Okay.
I urge the legislature, and I understand their concerns. I have concerns too about Minute's operations, but I have a superb commissioner there right now who's been on for a month, who deserves the time, the opportunity to make corrections for the rest of this calendar year, and then a new administration and a new legislature can come in with a 5-month session next January and devote the time and attention and the thoughtful care necessary to decide what they want to do with Minute, and if they want to change it around some way or another, what the consequences of that are going to be, rather than doing something just knee-jerk in the remaining 5 weeks of the legislative session.
As of this week, we're 6 months from the needed rollout of MNsure, of Real ID, and you're making the case that this should happen in a phase, early, potentially a phased-in rollout. Will Minnesota be ready for that?
Well, there's a case where we had contracted from the beginning with a private firm that has an established record with about 7 other states, and for everything we're told, which is a frequent question, is that it's on schedule, on time. It will, it'll take a year to issue the Real ID licenses, just because of the time in which people renew their licenses. And we'll have already alerted the U.S. Department of Homeland Security to that reality, and they haven't made any official decision, but I have no reason to believe that they will not give us a further extension to complete the process. So anything can happen, but I'm confident that we will have that project completed by the statutory deadline, October 1st, and that we'll have the Department of Homeland Security's forbearance to implement that new system. And I believe, based on the experience of other states, that it's going to be a successful one from the outset.
Are you saying to Minnesotans who are worried, who have travel plans coming up and aren't sure if their driver's licenses will work after October, that we'll be okay because we will probably get a federal extension on that? Won't have to worry about it?
We've asked for a federal extension already, and they're not issuing those at this point, but we're in ongoing consultation with them, and we'll be applying, I can't say exactly when, but whenever they indicate they're willing to accept formal applications for extensions, we'll be applying for that. So we should, I hope and believe we'll have a definite word well before October. And I'm, again, I would give Minnesotans my assurance that we're going to have this taken care of. I think we have been on top of this all the way. It's been managed well. We have a good relationship with the contractor. We find a reputable private contractor. Put this together. I mean, everything is tracking according to the plan.
Governor, as you know, Governor Valenti is running for a third term. He is critical of some of the programs you put in place. Is he accurately reflecting the last 8 years?
No, but I don't expect him to. He's not accurately reflecting his own 8 years, but I'm not going to get into a daily or weekly combat with former Governor Plenty. He's got a perfect right to run for office. He got 3 DFL candidates that are going to need to, one of them eventually make their case for why one of them should be elected. I'll stand on my record. I think the facts speak for themselves. It's a 3.2% unemployment, a balanced budget. Almost 300,000 more people working than when I took office. $2 billion owed to schools that were paid back. You can just run down the line of just factual contrast for what I inherited in January of 2011 and where things stand today. And I hope Minnesotans will take note of that before they make their decision.
Well, a follow-up to that, you reported on the front page of the paper this morning as calling his performance abysmal. Do you stand by those comments?
Yes, oh, absolutely. I mean, $6.2 billion deficit, one of the 5 worst states for a deficit as a percent of the state budget. I said over $2 billion, I mean, borrowed is a euphemism, taken from the schools to try to patch one of the holes. And I mean, I could go on, but yes, I stand by that word, absolutely.
He's going to argue that he served in the post-9/11 era, then the worst recession we've had in decades, whereas you did not face any of those problems. How would you respond to that?
Well, again, you look at our deficit as a percent of our budget. Every other state went through the Great Recession. And we were one of the 5 worst in terms of the fiscal irresponsibility, in terms of the budget deficit projected as a percent of the overall state budget. So, I mean, and that is, I think, a very valid and fair comparison. And, did economic conditions improve after I took office? Sure they did. But Minnesota's recovery, which they're now also trying to claim somehow that they deserve credit for in 2011 and 12, even though they created all these very serious problems. But, Minnesota did better than the nation, recovered faster. For fourth tier, turned our fiscal situation around, allowed us to pay off the school debt, which has then grown to $2.7 billion. It allowed us to turn chronic deficits into surpluses, to change our, reassure the rating agencies that we're on sound fiscal footing, and that's continued to this time. People say, well, eliminate the fourth tier. That's $1.6 billion for this biennium, and probably a little bit more for the next. So you take $1.6 billion out of the current revenue situation, and we would go from a modest surplus to a serious deficit, and same projected for the next biennium. So, I mean, these have been sound fiscal policies, recognized as such. You've got all sorts of national organizations who said we're one of the best states, best run state, best managed state, best economies. I mean, just across the board. Objective national observers say we've done very well. And I'll stand on that record.
How willing will you be to hit the campaign trail to defend your record if the Republicans are going to make the fall election a referendum on your legacy? Are you going to go to bat for yourself to try to defend your legacy?
Well, I'll certainly defend myself and defend my record from the distortions and the just dishonest portrayal of it. I think the facts should speak for themselves. 3.2% unemployment. I mean, that's a fact. 6.9% when I took office. $6.2 billion deficit when I came in. That's a fact. Now it's $329 million surplus. We'll see what they do at this time, but $2.7 billion owed to the schools by August of 2011. Now it's none of that, and we have a $1.6 billion budgeted reserve, almost $2 billion you put in the cash flow account in reserve to protect Minnesota from future downturns. Those are the facts. And, I guess if I have to defend them by just pointing out the facts, I will do so. I'm not going to spend I'm not running against Governor Plenty. Others are. I mean, elections are to some extent a referendum on the past, but that's for a re-election of an incumbent. This is a new slate, and this is about the future of Minnesota. I think the last 16 years are instructive. The 8 years under DFL leadership and the 8 years under Republican leadership, I think that's a good reference point for Minnesotans. But I think the real question is who can best lead the state and in what direction do they want to lead the state for the next 4 years.
Do you plan to endorse a DFL candidate before the conventions?
I don't have any present plans to, no. I hope the party will endorse because I think it's important, and I hope it will prevail so we can set our differences aside and focus on what will be a very tough general election. And so I would expect I'll endorse afterward.
Governor, the Republicans are likely to use the failures of MNlars and MNsure before that as major talking points in this campaign season. I mean, they already are. And you can talk about your legacy from the facts that you just gave. How will you defend your record and the administration's record with these failed IT rollouts?
Well, I've tried my best to be perfect and have the administration be perfect. And like all human beings, I've fallen short. We've fallen short. MNsure started out badly, but now it's functioning very well. People can still disagree with the basic ideology behind it, which is a federal, but the actual functioning of MNsure has been very, very top of the line, very efficient, and so that and that's what I believe will happen with MNlars, and I can't say the timeline, but that was after they'll work out the bugs and set it up. Yeah, I mean, as I said, that's why they won't let us answer the phones. The more and more people get turned away without answers to their questions and just think, that we're totally indifferent to their situation, the worse it looks for us and the better it looks for them. I can't think of any other explanation why they wouldn't provide money with the backlog of phone calls and the number of people that can't get attention, why they would deny that money, specifically deny that money. So we couldn't make the problem better before next November. It's really appalling, but that's what it is. But yeah, they'll make a big deal out of MNlars. I don't think that, they'll make a big deal of the Affordable Care Act, which they did in 2014 and 2016. But now, we're proposing an alternative Minnesota Care buy-in, which will enable Minnesotans buying individual health care insurance to purchase that at rates that are below what they have access to now, and they won't give it a hearing, they won't let it go anywhere. Same with a penny a pill. They won't give that a hearing, they won't let it go anywhere. So you got the people of Minnesota against the big pharma industry, and the big pharma is where the Republicans go. You got Minnesotans against the big insurance companies, or the health care, and the Republicans side up with the insurance companies against the best interests of Minnesota. And those will be issues that I think Minnesotans should be seriously concerned about. The elder care, talk about that more next week, but here you got the Senate author giving her presentation to the committee with nursing home lobbyists on either side of her. I've never seen that before in state government in Minnesota. Never anything that blatant. And her bill reflects that. There's 5 task forces and 2 working groups, and nothing going forward right now to address the absence of any licensure and oversight over the assisted living facilities. And the House bill is even weaker, and they haven't even taken theirs up. So we'll have a lot to talk about this fall.
Have you had any conversations with the legislative leaders about the Medicaid work requirement?
I have not, no. You know, they pulled the stunt, you know, they keep recycling these things. They talk about, you know, innovative government. You know, I remember workfare back under President Reagan. You know, all these, it's the same thing with the Medicaid premium, the twice-a-year check. You know, I mean, you know, these people, those people are cheating the system. They're ripping off the taxpayer with medical care they're not entitled to, with, you know, they should have to work. I mean, it's just about driving a wedge between people who are in serious medical straits, most of them, and not even candidates for working, and it's heartless and cruel and it's politically charged. And, you know, back in 1986, when the Republicans pushed the workfare issue and the welfare cheats issue to the extreme, and they thought that was going to bring in Cal Ludeman and beat Rudy Perpich, Minnesotans stood up and rejected that by more than 2-1, and flipped the legislature to the House, which had championed that those draconian measures. You know, what kind of Minnesota do we have now 30 years later? We'll find out. But hitting people when they're down, making their lives more difficult, and driving them off of health care, which means that they will then go to emergency rooms without coverage and raise the prices for everybody else. I mean, it's just driving us right back to where we were before, which is where when over half the personal bankruptcies in the country were caused by medical costs people couldn't afford, and everybody was out there, you know, on their own, and whoever was offering policies or care could advertise however they wanted and befuddle people, and then you find out after you purchased a policy and you paid for even years, and you or somebody in your family gets sick, it's not covered. And that's what they're pushing us back to. And on that cheerful note, anything else?
Governor, one other question. Are you familiar with the millionaire who testified yesterday about getting food stamps for 19 months to show how easy it is to get them without having to prove your actual need?
System. I mean, how easy it is. I mean, he's a smart guy. He's a millionaire. He's obviously figured out how to. I mean, one person can game the system. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people that are on these programs, and they find one person who's figured out how to game the system. I mean, if I were him, I would have been ashamed to show up and disclose what I'd done. But it's not instructive. Are there other people that are gaming the system? Sure. Are there people, you know, Wells Fargo who are gaming the customers? Are there people, you know, you name it. Any large system, you know, given human beings, you're going to have, you know, those handful of people. The question is, are you going to make public policy based on those anecdotes? Or are you going to look at the totality of the situation?
Should it be tightened up a little bit so that somebody like him can't do this?
Well, I don't know all the circumstances. He claims he did it legally based on the rules that say what assets are counted against your eligibility and what do not. If that's the case, and those are federal rules, so I mean you have to look at those and see. But the notion that he's indicative of people, you know, all over the state of Minnesota who are ripping off taxpayers is unproven and unfortunate. You had a question.
Governor, I was just going to ask about the letter you sent this morning to the House Speaker. Are you particularly concerned that controversial proposals will be added to the pension bill? And if it's not passed this year, what will be the impact on the state?
Well, I'm concerned on any bill now that's you know, a must-have vehicle for people to add mischief. And the Senate, to its great credit, Senator Rosen and Senator Gazelka passed a clean bill, passed it before the break. And I hope that the House will do the same. If it doesn't pass, we'll have another year of inattention. The rating agencies are already raising concerns, and we've assured them best we can that we think we're going to take care of it this session. If we don't, we jeopardize our fiscal rating. And I don't remember the exact numbers, but Myron France can give you a chapter and verse on what the additional costs will be then the next biennium and the years following, but it mounts up significantly.
Governor, on a lighter note, is there any Dayton family lore about the department store monkey?
What do you know? And when did you know it?
I was not responsible. Although I do remember when they put the summer I worked there, in 1968, they had set these exhibits up on the 8th floor to get people to come up and shop on the way up, shop on the way down. So they had this rainforest and big knitting, and they had these monkeys, and then they had these chirping birds. And somebody didn't figure out that the monkeys were carnivores. And I won't get into graphic detail in front of the cameras here, what I saw with one monkey, one bird. But the next day they had a netting up to segregate and separate the birds from the monkeys. And if they said one monkey got out and went into the air duct, it's like when I got a boa constrictor for my then 10-year-old son, and this woman, they were like, she had 8 of these little ones, about 18 inches at that point. He grew to 8 feet. But she said, now, if you're going to clean the cage, make sure you block up the air ducts. Because he could slither into the air duct, She said, why, one of his brothers or sisters disappeared like 2 weeks ago. We haven't found him yet. I would not sleep very well if I thought this snake might appear in the middle of the night. The monkey didn't fare as well, I guess. Thanks.